I never really believed that evil could hide behind a smile until I met my stepmom, Victoria. When my dad introduced her to me 2 years after my mom passed away, she seemed perfect. She had soft blonde hair, wore elegant clothes, and always smelled like expensive perfume. Everyone loved her, but from the very first day, I could tell something was off. She was too sweet, too polished, like someone always performing for an audience. At first, I tried my best to make things work. I helped her cook, cleaned up after dinner, and even complimented her on how nicely she decorated the house. But she barely noticed me. She'd smile at my dad and then look through me as if I didn't exist. Whenever Dad wasn't around, her tone changed, cold, sharp, and dismissive. I told myself it was just her way of adjusting, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Coming home from college for the summer was supposed to be relaxing. I wanted to spend time with my dad, maybe visit my old friends, and enjoy home-cooked meals after months of cafeteria food. But the moment I stepped inside the house, I felt the tension. Victoria greeted me with that same fake smile and said, "Oh, Lena, you're back. I hope you don't mind sharing the guest room this time." My old room had been turned into her home office. I just nodded and told her it was fine, but inside it stung. She had slowly taken over everything, the house, the kitchen, even my dad's attention. He was happier than I'd seen him in years, and that made it harder to say anything. Whenever she made some passive-aggressive comment, he thought I was being sensitive. So I kept quiet. The first few days passed awkwardly. Victoria would cook fancy dinners, salmon, roast chicken, creamy pasta, but she never made enough for 3. She always plated a generous portion for my dad, a smaller one for herself, and left me with scraps or leftovers. I didn't complain. I just ate what I could and told myself I'd be back at school soon. Still, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. She'd whisper on the phone when Dad wasn't home. Once, I caught her saying something about getting rid of problems for good. When she saw me, she froze and smiled like nothing had happened. I laughed it off at the time, but the words stuck with me. One night, after she made my dad's favorite lasagna, I saw the way she looked at it, proud, almost satisfied. She covered it carefully and told me not to touch it, saying it was for him when he got home from work. Her tone wasn't casual, it was firm, like a warning. I didn't know why, but something about that meal made me uneasy. I didn't realize then that one simple decision, one plate of food, would change everything. I had no idea what was coming, or how close I was to finding out just how dangerous that smile really was. After a few weeks back home, things started to feel worse. Victoria's act was perfect whenever Dad was around. She laughed at his jokes, kissed his cheek while serving dinner, and always made sure his plate looked picture perfect. To anyone else, she was the definition of a loving wife. But when it was just the two of us, her mask slipped. The warmth in her voice turned into sharp, cold words. She barely looked at me unless it was to give an order or a fake smile that never reached her eyes. She treated me like a guest who overstayed her welcome. Every morning, she made breakfast for Dad, eggs, bacon, and coffee brewed just the way he liked it. For me, she'd leave burnt toast or tell me there were leftovers in the fridge. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause trouble. I kept reminding myself that I'd be going back to school soon, and I could handle her until then. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. It wasn't just dislike. It was something darker, heavier, like she wanted me gone completely. Sometimes I'd hear her talking softly on the phone. The walls in the house weren't thick, and her voice would drift through the hallway. She never said names, but her tone always made my skin crawl. Once I heard her say, "I just need to get rid of the problem once and for all." I froze outside her door. She must have sensed me because she went quiet immediately, then opened the door with a bright, fake smile. "Eavesdropping, Lena?" she asked sweetly. I mumbled something about looking for my charger and walked away, but my heart was pounding. After that, I started paying more attention. She kept a small black notebook in the kitchen drawer and would quickly close it whenever I entered. She also began spending more time in the garage, which was strange since she never liked the smell of it. Every night she seemed calmer, almost like she was waiting for something to happen. One evening, she announced she was making lasagna, my favorite meal that my mom used to make before she passed away. I was surprised she remembered. For a moment, I thought maybe she was trying to be kind. But when she said, "This one's for your dad only, Lena," her eyes had that same cold gleam I'd seen before. She placed the dish on the counter, covered it carefully with foil, and said she didn't want anyone touching it before dinner. Then she smiled, a small, twisted smile that made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was imagining it, but a voice in my head kept whispering that something wasn't right. That night, as the smell of lasagna filled the house, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing inside me. I didn't know why, but it felt like that meal meant more than just dinner. Something inside me warned that this was the moment everything was about to change. That night, the house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Dad called to say he'd be late because of a meeting at work. Victoria didn't seem bothered. In fact, she looked almost pleased. She told me she'd already prepared dinner, and that Dad could heat his food later when he got home. The smell of lasagna filled the air, rich with cheese and spices. My stomach growled, but I didn't dare touch anything without permission. She poured herself a glass of wine and told me she was going to take a shower before dinner. "Don't wait up for me," she said lightly, her voice too calm, too careful. Then she disappeared down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the floor until the bathroom door closed. I sat at the table, staring at the steaming dish of lasagna. The clock ticked slowly, and the smell was almost painful. I hadn't eaten since morning. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my class notes, but my eyes kept drifting back to the food. My stomach was begging for just one bite. Minutes passed, and I started convincing myself that it would be fine. Dad wasn't home yet, and Victoria wouldn't even notice if I took a small portion. I told myself it was harmless, just a little taste. So I grabbed a plate, scooped a small serving, and sat down. The first bite was delicious, but something about it felt off. Maybe it was just guilt, or maybe the sauce tasted slightly bitter. I couldn't tell. I brushed it off and took another bite. Not even 5 minutes later, I started feeling strange. My vision blurred slightly, and my heartbeat sped up. The room seemed to tilt a little, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My hands were trembling, and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. I thought maybe it was exhaustion, but then a sharp pain hit my stomach, twisting it like a knot. Panic set in. My breathing became uneven, and I tried calling out for Victoria, but my voice came out weak and broken. I stood up, but the floor felt like it was moving. My knees gave out, and the plate slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor. My heart was pounding so fast it hurt. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of footsteps rushing toward me. Then I saw her face, Victoria's face, frozen in shock as she stared down at me. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a split second, I saw something in her eyes, fear, anger, or maybe guilt. Then everything went black. I didn't know it at the time, but that meal wasn't meant for me. It was meant for someone else. And by the time I realized it, it was already too late. When I opened my eyes, everything was blurry and bright. The ceiling above me was white, and the steady beeping sound beside me told me I wasn't at home. My throat was dry, and there was a strange taste in my mouth. As I tried to move, I felt a tug on my arm and realized there were 4 tubes connected to me. My whole body felt weak, like all my strength had been drained. Then I saw my dad. He was sitting in a chair next to the bed, his hands clasped together, his eyes red and tired. When he noticed I was awake, he stood up so quickly that the chair almost fell backward. "Lena, thank God," he said, his voice shaking. He grabbed my hand and looked at me with a mix of fear and relief. "You scared me half to death." Before I could speak, a doctor entered the room holding a clipboard. He asked me how I was feeling, and then explained what had happened. His words made my stomach drop. He said there were traces of rat poison in my system, but I was lucky they'd caught it in time. I stared at him, not understanding at first. Rat poison? How could that even happen? My mind flashed back to the lasagna, the strange taste, and Victoria's smirk before she went to take a shower. Dad looked confused and pale. He kept repeating that it didn't make sense, that there must have been some mistake. But when I saw the way Victoria stood in the corner of the room, pretending to cry, my skin crawled. Her makeup was smeared, and she held a tissue, but her eyes weren't wet. She was playing her part, the perfect, terrified stepmom. She kept saying things like, "Oh, I don't know how this could happen," and "I always make sure everything is clean." But the way she avoided my eyes told me everything. A police officer came in shortly after, asking a few questions about what I'd eat. He told us that samples from the kitchen had already been collected. Victoria's expression changed just slightly when she heard that, a quick flicker of panic before she regained her calm face. She tried to act confused, asking, "Samples? What for?" But her voice trembled, and even Dad noticed it. When the officer left, silence filled the room. My father finally turned to her, his face pale and drawn. "Victoria," he said slowly, "what's going on?" She looked offended, even hurt, and quickly turned it around. "You can't possibly think I'd hurt Lena," she said, clutching her chest dramatically. "You know how much I care about this family." I wanted to speak, to tell him everything, the phone calls, the cold looks, the way she'd warned me not to touch the food, but my voice was too weak. I just stared at her, and for the first time, she didn't smile. She knew the truth was slipping out of her control. Lying there in that hospital bed, I realized something terrifying. She hadn't planned to poison me. The lasagna was meant for Dad. I was never supposed to take that bite. And now, because I did, her perfect act was starting to fall apart, piece by piece. The next few days at the hospital felt like a blur. Detectives came and went, asking questions, taking notes, and trying to piece everything together. They questioned me first, gently but firmly, wanting to know what I remembered about that night. I told them about the lasagna, how Victoria had told me not to touch it, and how she seemed surprised when she found me on the floor. They nodded, writing everything down carefully. Then it was Victoria's turn. She put on another performance, acting like a devastated wife and stepmother. She cried loudly, dabbed her eyes with tissues, and spoke in a trembling voice about how she could never hurt anyone. But even while pretending to cry, her hands didn't shake. She looked more annoyed than sad whenever she thought no one was watching. At first, my dad still believed her. He told the police it must have been some kind of mix-up, that maybe the poison came from old pest control chemicals in the garage. He kept defending her, saying she loved him and would never do something like that. I could see how much he wanted to believe it. After losing my mom, he was desperate to hold on to what he thought was love. But the detectives didn't look convinced. They kept digging, asking to check Victoria's laptop and phone. She hesitated, then agreed, trying to look cooperative. A few hours later, one of the detectives came back to my hospital room with my father. His face was pale, his eyes wide and full of disbelief. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the floor like he'd seen a ghost. The detective explained in a calm, serious voice what they had found. Searches on Victoria's computer for non-lethal poisons, how much rat poison causes illness, and life insurance inheritance law. I watched as my dad's face went blank. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then came the part that broke him completely. The detective mentioned that, just a few weeks ago, my dad had signed new life insurance documents. Victoria had convinced him it was just a routine update. But according to the paperwork, she was listed as the sole beneficiary. Not me. Not anyone else. Just her. The room felt heavy and silent. My dad slowly sat down, his hands shaking. She planned this? He whispered, almost to himself. The detective gave a small nod. That was the moment it all sank in. She had planned to kill him. The lasagna was supposed to be his last meal, not mine. I felt cold all over as the truth hit me. The perfect smile, the fake kindness, the way she had taken over the house. It all made sense now. She had been building up to this for months, maybe longer. I wasn't the target. I was just the mistake that ruined her plan. Victoria stayed silent after that. She didn't cry anymore, didn't speak much, just sat there with that same empty look on her face. The cracks in her mask had finally started to show, and this time, there was no way to hide them. A few days after the police found those searches on Victoria's laptop, I was discharged from the hospital. I still felt weak, but I wanted to go home and see things for myself. My dad was quieter than usual. He hadn't filed for divorce yet, but I could tell he was struggling to accept the truth. Victoria was pretending to cooperate with the investigation, acting calm and polite whenever the officers came by, but I could see the tension behind her eyes. She knew the walls were closing in. One afternoon, while resting in my room, a memory came back to me, something small but important. Months earlier, before I left for college, I had seen Victoria using a small silver flash drive. She used to plug it into her laptop and hide it quickly whenever someone walked into the room. Once, I'd even seen her slip it into her vanity drawer before locking it. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now, after everything that happened, it felt like a clue. The next morning, Victoria went to the police station for more questioning. Dad was gone for work, and the house was finally empty. My hands were still shaky, but I forced myself out of bed and walked quietly to her. The air smelled like her perfume, heavy and sweet, the kind that made you feel dizzy after too long. I opened the vanity drawers carefully, one by one, but found nothing. Then I noticed a small piece of tape sticking out from under the wooden edge. My heart started racing. I peeled it back slowly, and there it was, the same silver flash drive I remembered. My hands trembled as I took it and plugged it into her laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for, but what I found made my blood run cold. There were voice memos, recordings of phone calls between Victoria and a man. His voice was deep and familiar, like someone she trusted. The first few recordings were about money and life insurance, but then it got darker. In one clip, she said, "He's too trusting. It'll be easy to mix small doses. No one will suspect a heart attack." The man laughed and replied, "Just make sure the papers are signed first." I scrolled through the files and found one labeled Final Plan. When I clicked it, I heard her voice again, clearer this time. "Once it's done, I'll transfer the money and meet you in Florida. We'll start fresh." That's when she mentioned his name, Greg, her ex-husband. The same man she had told my dad she'd cut out of her life years ago. Everything suddenly made sense. The poison, the insurance, the fake affection, it was all a plan. She never loved my father. She was going to kill him slowly, make it look natural, and disappear with the money and her ex. As I sat there listening to her voice, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that she had fooled us for so long, and relief that I finally had proof. I copied the files onto my phone and hid the flash drive back where I found it. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I knew exactly what I had to do, and this time, she wouldn't see it coming. When my dad came home that evening, he looked exhausted. He'd been trying to keep things together, but I could tell the truth was eating him up inside. I asked him to sit down because I had something to show him. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and opened the audio files I'd copied from the flash drive. I pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room. At first, Dad looked confused, but as she began talking about small doses and no one will suspect a heart attack, the color drained from his face. Then came the man's voice, Greg, laughing and agreeing with her plan. By the time the clip ended, my dad looked like someone had punched him in the chest. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared at the wall, breathing hard. Then his eyes filled with tears. I should have believed you, Lena, he whispered, his voice breaking. All those times you tried to tell me, and I defended her. I reached over and squeezed his hand. It's not your fault, Dad. She fooled all of us. After that, we went straight to the police station. The detectives listened to the recordings carefully, and their faces turned serious. One of them nodded and said it was enough to take the case further. They made copies of the evidence and told us to go home, but to stay where they could reach us. 2 officers volunteered to accompany us that evening. When we got back, the house was dark. Around 8 o'clock, Victoria's car pulled into the driveway. She walked in smiling, pretending nothing had happened. "Oh, you're home early," she said sweetly, setting her purse down. "How are you feeling, Lena?" My dad stood up slowly. "Better," he said quietly. "Thanks to her." His voice was calm, but there was something cold in it that made her stop smiling. Then he nodded toward the officers, who stepped out from the hallway. Victoria froze, her eyes darting from him to them. "What's going on?" she asked, still trying to sound innocent. Dad didn't answer. Instead, he played the recording from my phone. Her own voice filled the room again, calm, cruel, and confident, talking about poisoning him. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Her face went pale, then turned red. "You went through my things," she shouted. "You set me up." She looked at me like she wanted to tear me apart. "You ruined everything." Her mask was gone completely now. The sweet, loving wife had vanished, and all that was left was fury. The officers stepped forward, telling her to calm down, but she started screaming that it was all my fault, that if I hadn't come home, none of this would have happened. Dad didn't say another word. He just stood there, staring at the woman he thought he loved, his face full of heartbreak. As the officers handcuffed her, Victoria kept shouting, but her words didn't matter anymore. Her plan had failed. The poison she meant for my father had exposed her instead. The act she'd built so carefully was destroyed in a single night, and this time, there was no pretending left. After that night, everything moved fast. The police took Victoria away in handcuffs, and it felt like the entire neighborhood was awake watching. The flashing red and blue lights made the house look strange, like a stage where her fake life was finally collapsing. My dad and I stood on the porch in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. When the officers drove off, it was finally quiet again, too quiet. The next morning, detectives came back for follow-up statement. They told us that Victoria had been charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Apparently, she'd already made plans to withdraw a large sum of money from one of Dad's accounts and had purchased plane tickets under a different name. Hearing that made my skin crawl. She'd been ready to disappear the moment he died. The story spread quickly. Within a day, local reporters were outside our gate asking for comments, trying to piece together what had happened. Headlines mentioned, a woman accused of poisoning her husband for insurance money. We refused every request for interview. Dad didn't want our private pain turned into gossip. We just wanted peace, something we hadn't had for a long time. Physically, I recovered faster than expected, but emotionally, it was harder. I couldn't eat lasagna again. I couldn't even step into the kitchen without remembering that night. The smell, the dizziness, the sound of the plate hitting the floor. I started therapy to help deal with the fear and anger that lingered. My dad joined me for a few sessions. He was drowning in guilt. More than once, I found him sitting alone, staring at old family photos of my mom. "I should have seen it," he said one evening. His voice was low, full of regret. "She was manipulating me right in front of you, and I didn't believe you." I told him that none of it was his fault. Victoria was good at pretending. She fooled everyone. But he couldn't forgive himself easily. As for me, I tried to focus on healing. Each day felt like a small victory, walking around the house, cooking simple meals, breathing without fear. I learned to appreciate quiet mornings again, even if they felt empty. But deep inside, I knew something important. I had survived. She wanted to destroy our family for money, and instead, her own greed exposed her. Sometimes, I'd sit by the kitchen table and look at the spot where it all happened. The same meal that was supposed to end my father's life had ended her lies instead. It was strange how life worked, how evil plans sometimes turned against the people who made them. Survival became my quiet revenge. I didn't need to yell, hate, or fight. The truth had already done the job for me. And every time I saw my dad smile, even a little, I knew she hadn't won. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into something that felt normal again. The investigation ended, and Victoria stayed in custody waiting for her trial. The house felt lighter without her, but it also carried too many memories. Some nights, I could still hear echoes of that awful night. The crash of the plate, the sirens, my dad's shaking voice. It didn't feel like home anymore. One warm afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery where my mom was buried. It had been months since I'd visited. The grass around her headstone was neatly trimmed, and the air smelled of fresh rain. I knelt beside her grave, tracing my fingers over her name. For a while, I just sat there in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees. Then softly, I began to talk. "I wish you were here," I whispered. "You always knew when something felt wrong. You would have seen through her faster than any of us." My voice shook, but I smiled through the tears. "You'd be proud, Mom. I protected Dad, even if it almost cost me my life." Saying it out loud felt like letting go of something heavy. I stayed there for a long time, remembering the small things, her laugh, her lasagna recipe, the way she used to hum while cooking. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. When I got home, Dad was sitting in the living room, reading. He looked different now, tired but more present. He'd started therapy, and was finally opening up about everything he had ignored. It wasn't easy for him. He blamed himself for being blind to Victoria's manipulation, but he was trying to forgive himself, one step at a time. We spent more time together after that. Simple things like watching old movies, cooking dinner, and talking about Mom. Slowly, the distance that had grown between us began to fade. It felt like we were finally becoming a family again, just the two of us. Eventually, we decided to sell the house. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew it was time. There were too many ghosts there, too many memories that hurt to keep reliving. The day we packed up, I stood in the kitchen one last time. The sunlight hit the counter where it all happened, and I took a deep breath. "Never again," I whispered to myself. I promised that I would never let anyone make me feel unwanted in my own home again. I'd learned the hard way that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the sharpest lies. But I also learned something else, that betrayal, as painful as it is, can save you. Because when someone tries to destroy you and fails, it shows you exactly who's real, who's worth keeping, and who you are when everything falls apart. And in that truth, I finally found peace. Looking back now, I realized that what happened to me wasn't just about poison in a meal. It was about something deeper. Victoria wanted to erase me, not only from the house, but from my father's heart. Every cold glance, every fake smile, every cruel word she hid behind her perfect wife act. It was all part of a plan to make me disappear slowly. She didn't want me to exist as a reminder of the life my dad had before her. It's strange how you don't see the danger when it's wrapped in kindness. She played her role so well that even I doubted myself sometime. I thought maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe she wasn't that bad. But deep down, something in me kept warning that her sweetness wasn't real. I just never imagined that her jealousy could turn into something so dark. Fate, though, has a strange way of revealing the truth. The meal that was meant to kill my father and break our family ended up doing the opposite. It exposed her. It forced the truth out into the open. Every lie she told came crashing down, and the mask she'd worn so perfectly finally cracked. In the end, she destroyed herself with the very plan she made to destroy us. Sometimes I still think about that night and wonder how close we came to losing everything. But then I remind myself I survived. My dad survived. We both walked away stronger, wiser, and far more aware of what real love and trust should look like. What she meant for harm turned into something that rebuilt our bond. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes from surviving betrayal. It teaches you to listen to your instincts, even when everyone else tells you you're imagining. I learned that if your heart is uneasy, it's for a reason. The world tells us to be polite, to keep peace, to ignore small red flags. But sometimes those small things are warnings, and listening to them can save your life. So if you've ever felt unwanted by someone who's supposed to care, don't ignore it. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they smile and pretend to love your family. The truth has a way of finding light, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. Evil hides behind charm. It hides behind fake kindness and sweet words. But it never lasts, because the truth, no matter how painful, always wins in the end. When I think of that meal now, I don't feel fear anymore. I feel strength. That lasagna, the one that almost ended my life, became the turning point that saved me and my father. Sometimes the thing meant to destroy you ends up feeding your courage instead. And when you finally see the truth for what it is, you realize that survival itself is the sweetest revenge.